and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm, and my preferred pronouns are he, him, and his.
I'm Ann Northrop, and my preferred pronoun is, it's Andy Humm's birthday this Friday. Happy 65th, Andy.
I am happy to be on Medicare on a half-price Metro card in New York, and I'm going to try to preserve all that for you and extend it to all of humanity.
Good luck with that.
It is international.
When are you starting that?
I started a long time ago.
Okay.
Medicare for all. It is International Pronouns Day, and that's why I did that. But look, we're here to talk about what's going on in the world, and we are in the home stretch to take back some power in this country on November 6th.
We have good and bad signs that we'll tell you about. Meanwhile, surprise, surprise, Brett Kavanaugh shows he's to the right of Neil Gorsuch, and that means he's off in a very small corner because Neil Gorsuch is also very right at the Supreme Court. And of course, they have confirmed 15 more right-wing federal judges.
With more on the way.
Of course.
Trump wants you to pay to protest in front of the White House, literally.
He's monetizing everything. Maybe that'll make up for the money we lost on the corporate tax cuts. There is trouble at Lambda Legal Defense internally, as explicated in a piece on the Huffington Post website.
Anti-gay goons were welcomed to the New York Republican Club, and then they went out and beat up anti-fascist protesters.
Not a pretty sight. We are mourning the loss of 2 pioneering activists and a 3rd pioneer.
Yes,
the list this week.
This story is almost too much to bear. A 14-year-old kid beaten to death in Iraq just for the suspicion that he was gay.
And there has been a surge in anti-LGBT violence in Brazil as the far-right presidential candidate is leading the race there.
On the other hand, Australia, which has a conservative government, is looking at banning private schools from discriminating against LGBT students.
Well, this is right after they gave them the right to do so.
Well,
it's interesting. And Andy will review Stockard Channing in
Apologia.
Thank you. Like Apollonia.
Which doesn't mean an apology.
And a couple of other plays, too?
No,
One or two others?
No, I think that's it. I don't know.
Okay.
Am I reviewing other shows?
You're not reviewing Hadrian. You're just talking about it.
We start with politics, and I have to say, we read the feed from the Human Rights Campaign. I am encouraged that they've got all these people, 1,000 get-out-the-vote events across 69 key House races. The woman who does the voice of Linda Simpson, Yardley Smith, she donated $250,000 to the super PAC. So, there is a big LGBT effort across the country. We hope that you are a part of it to get out the vote, get your friends to vote, and turn this country around.
Well, certainly if you read HRC's daily newsletter, AM Equality, and I recommend all of you do, and then you don't have to watch the show anymore because a lot of the news is from there. You will see that Chad Griffin is everywhere. He is everywhere. And I like that. I like the fact that they do have people everywhere. But I have to say the single most encouraging piece of news I heard this week, because I have been scared about this midterm stuff and the Republicans catching up in enthusiasm and surging ahead of Democrats in Senate races and stuff. But the most encouraging piece of news I heard were the results from the first day of early voting in Georgia.
Yes. And we should, it was fantastic. It's exponential.
Can I tell them what it is?
Yes.
3 times as many people voted on the first day of early voting in Georgia as voted 4 years ago in the last midterm election.
And this is despite
3 times.
And this is despite extreme. You keep hearing about it, but I don't know why we can't stop this voter suppression. Brian Kemp is the Republican nominee for governor. He's also the Secretary of State. He is withholding, not processing applications. He's not letting people vote here. He's purging the rolls, etc.
We can't stop it because they have the power.
Well, we used to be able to stop all of this in federal court. All of it.
You may have listened to the Gay USA show talk about the appointments of federal judges who are right-wingers.
Yes, but they're not everybody now. The Voting Rights Act it was partially undone by the Supreme Court, but not entirely. So they can't just do anything that they want. They
delay, they deny, they obfuscate, they do what they can.
But this Brian Kemp, while he's doing this, Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate, exciting candidate, she is marching in the Atlanta Pride Parade, the first time a candidate for governor has done that. And she's very pro-gay, whereas Kemp, who is very anti-gay, is running ads on Grindr. You read that, didn't you?
I think by mistake.
Well, I mean, I think they
made a sort of generic ad buy, and some of them ended up on Grindr.
Of course, yeah. But let it go into the mix of people's thinking. And then it's, of course, horrible what's happening in North Dakota, making it harder for Native Americans to vote, a key constituency for Heidi Heitkamp there. They've knocked off 20% of the voters off the rolls, and the Supreme Court this week refused an appeal of that.
Exactly.
What did you, by the way, speaking of politics, what did you think of this revelation that Lee Atwater confessed on his deathbed that they set a trap for Gary Hart? That the whole monkey business thing was...
Did that surprise you? Do you remember Lee Atwater?
I remember Lee Atwater, and I remember he was guilty of dirty tricks. But I thought Gary Hart did that to himself by hanging out with Donna Rice.
A combination.
This is 1988.
He put himself in a position to be the subject of that kind of dirty trick, and he was taken advantage of, and that's how these things work.
And speaking of dirty tricks, Mike Bloomberg, who became a Democrat, he pledged $100 million to Democrats in the midterms, and it's not materializing. He hasn't even come close to that, and he's still supporting Republican Congressman Peter King on Long Island for re-election.
Yeah, I saw he did that.
Bad.
Yeah, that was some 9/11 connection or something.
Politics.
Well, let's go to the national leader for a while.
Okay.
He's doing some dirty politics. By the way, that interview on 60 Minutes of Trump, what a waste of time. Leslie Stahl didn't ask any follow-up questions or really get to him at all. I sat there doing my usual screaming at the TV, not entirely literally, but just sitting there thinking, you could have said this, you could have said that, you could have asked this question, but no, you just let him get away with all this stuff.
Right, they should have.
Now, he's going to avoid any real question, but you have to put the information out there in your questions to at least try to inform the public instead of letting him get away with all this.
Well, and of course, this whole Saudi situation. I mean, of course, I look at the Saudi situation, and what happened to this reporter from the Washington Post is horrendous. And now we have the tape on it of him being dismembered and having his fingers cut off and his head cut off, et cetera, at the behest of the Saudi prince. But of course,
who knows nothing.
We're all doing that every day in Yemen. The Saudis and the United States to the Yemeni people, slaughtering people. Trump is always like, oh, those kids who got gassed in Syria, I have to drop the biggest bomb ever. But what's happening in Yemen, we're doing.
Well, he brags about all the billions of dollars worth of military equipment, which, of course, he has completely exaggerated. But where is that equipment being used? It's being used to kill people in Yemen. This isn't some value-free transaction. They're doing things with these weapons they've bought from us.
And it's not as if Obama severed our relationship with the Saudis.
I'm not defending Obama.
Right. We have it's a long
or Hillary
history.
Clinton, for that matter.
Well,
but
and let's talk about the kind of people. I mean, it's almost entirely bad people, but. To see this week that Eric Dryban, this anti-gay crusader, we have a picture of him, got confirmed by the Senate on a party line vote to head the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. He oversees enforcement of U.S. civil rights laws and the Voting Rights Act, or what's left of it. And he's the guy who defended HB 2 in North Carolina, the bathroom bill, who fought for religious exemptions under the Affordable Care Act, etc. This is just, it's all foxes in the chicken coop. And shall we talk about the judges?
Yes, please.
Well, there were three of the. Well, first of all, McConnell and Schumer made a deal. We want to go home and campaign, so let's just confirm these 15 judges. Well, these include Richard Sullivan in the Second Circuit, David Porter in the Third, Ryan Nelson in the Ninth Circuit. These are some of the most right-wing judges possible. And then I read about one who's on deck. Her name is Allison Rushing, Fourth Circuit. She graduated law school in 2007. You're supposed to have 12 years of experience on the bench, or practicing law at least.
No, she's never been on the bench.
Right. You're supposed, but she actually worked for Alliance Defending Freedom.
Yes, she did. It was a summer associate job, but she also worked for the Federalist Society, or as a member of the Federalist Society. She is described as an extremist. She is described as comically inexperienced, and she was pro the Defense of Marriage Act. She clerked for Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch. And here's what they're doing with her. So Schumer and McConnell made a deal that they would confirm 15 judges and everybody could go home and do their campaigning. Well, meanwhile, they're going to have a recess hearing for this Allison Rushing. Grassley is going to rush through her confirmation hearing when nobody is in town. They'll have like 2 senators there who aren't up for re-election who will sit and conduct a hearing about her, and then she'll get confirmed by the Republican majority in the Senate to the Fourth Circuit bench. She'll be a United States Court of Appeals judge with no experience
for the rest of our lives,
this
is why
her life another 60 years.
This is why I am calling for the expansion of the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. I'm also calling for the indictment of Jared Kushner. I mean, this article about him not paying income taxes. I mean, they say they do this legally.
It was legal,
but it stinks to high heaven. And they wrote the tax bill to give more real estate deductions. I mean, and this is why they're going to come after your Social Security, your my Medicare, your Medicare, and all benefits, and say we can't afford it anymore because we don't have any money.
McConnell is already saying it. Oops. We didn't make up the tax cuts in revenues. Surprise, surprise. And this is so disappointing. We'll have to go after Medicare and Social Security.
Are you upset about all that? Well, you might want to go protest at the White House, but you're going to have to pay for the privilege if Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke has anything to do about it. They want to close off 80% of the sidewalks around the White House and charge sometimes when you have a thing on the mall, you have to put up a bond or something like that. But this would be
cleanup and protection.
This would be for any spontaneous demonstration. The Park Service, they do recoup for special events, but he's even got the Park Service doing this. Nixon tried to do this, by the way, during the Vietnam War. It didn't work,
because we're more out in the streets. We're not so out in the streets these days.
On the other hand, I shouldn't say on the other hand. Another right-winger that they're looking to appoint is this Patrick Bumate, and then to the Ninth Circuit, the California, the liberal circuit, which was the liberal circuit. He's an out-gay right-winger. We got a picture of him. He helped with the nominations of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch. She advises Jeff Sessions on opioids and organized crime.
He's an assistant U.S. attorney in L.A.
He is a member of an LGBT law group, but there it is.
We're doubtful that the Trump administration would let a non-right-winger slip through to the federal judiciary.
The first place I read this was on a right-wing site, and they were kind of upset about a homosexual getting this job.
Well, have they talked to Rick Grinnell lately?
Yeah. Our next UN ambassador?
I don't think so anymore. I think they want a woman.
Okay.
They're scared of women. Although if they drag it out another 3 weeks, they won't care anymore because they'll be past the midterms. Please vote. Please. Please. The voting participation rates are so low, and we really...
Not in Georgia.
We can make such a difference by actually going out and voting everywhere. So please. All right.
All right. By the way, we told you that Cynthia Nixon is on a third-party line for state assembly versus the Democratic veteran lesbian Deborah Glick. But Cynthia is supporting Deborah and wants the state Democratic Party to make amends for their mailer accusing her falsely of anti-Semitism by spending an equal amount to help reelect Deborah Glick.
That would be nice. Don't hold your breath would be my answer to that, however. In California, Greg Louganis, Olympic champion diver, is getting into the political game. He is recommending a no vote on reconfirming
Carol Corrigan,
Supreme Court Justice. They have to be, in California, they have to be reelected or reconfirmed periodically.
12-year terms. She was appointed in 2008. She ruled against same-sex marriage when it passed the Supreme Court.
Now, technically, what she did, she claimed she was pro same-sex marriage, but she ruled that the court should not be involved in deciding marriage. It should be for the people. That's an old argument.
She was a Schwarzenegger appointee. So Schwarzenegger, the legislature passed same-sex marriage. He vetoed it. He said it's up to the courts.
Yes.
So the courts come in and say, no, it has to be done by the legislature. Anyway,
it's
also,
a nifty little game.
Our viewers, Joe and Mark, would like you to vote no on Carol Corrigan.
Well, there you go. Between Greg Louganis and Joe and Mark, what more do you need?
Okay.
A shout out to several localities around the country. Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
Yep.
Westchester County, New York.
What did they do?
And Lakewood County City Council in Ohio. They have all banned conversion therapy for youth.
They have.
That was a good thing.
And in Kansas, Lambda Legal, more about which later, is suing them for not letting trans people fix their birth certificates. They're citing the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. Now, there are plenty of arguments about X gender markers and things like that. But in most of this country, you can, if you are a trans person, go into your state Secretary of State's office or whatever and change your gender marker on your birth certificate. Driver's licenses are even easier, but you need a birth certificate that's accurate to your lived gender to get all sorts of things in this world. And there are only 3 states in this country, it turns out, that bar that categorically: Ohio, Tennessee, and Kansas. So Lambda has now gone into court to represent a trans man and a few others who have been told they cannot correct their birth certificates in Kansas.
Okay. Should we talk about Lindsey Graham?
Go right ahead.
Well,
I hate to talk about
Chelsea
Lindsey Graham.
Handler tweeted, if you're wondering why Republicans took a sick day today, it's probably because it's National Coming Out Day, and I'm looking at you, Lindsey Graham. She had previously tweeted that Jeff Sessions is definitely a bottom. So whatever you feel about that, Graham was confronted about this by TMZ, and he said, number one,
walking through an airport.
Number one, she knows 0 about me, and to the extent that it matters, I'm not gay.
Okay, Lindsey, that's your story. Can we talk about the New York City Republican Club?
Yes. Now, all this this is a national controversy at this point because they invited this guy Gavin McInnes, is that his name, from the Proud Boys for a forum.
Second annual appearance.
This guy is like off the charts, anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-everything.
Well, he was one of the leaders of the right-wing violent crowd in Charlottesville.
Yes.
The Proud Boys are one of the white supremacist violent groups organizing in this country.
Black shirts.
To attack anyone who is not white and who is not straight. And
so we're showing a picture of the attack, but the police end up arresting 3 anti-fascist protesters at first. Now they say they're going to arrest more. They're going to go after more people, but
the Proud Boys specifically.
Of course, they did. While the Proud Boys were doing this, they were shouting things: "Faggot, sea sucker," and "I like beer," in honor of Judge Kavanaugh.
Now, did you see the video of them coming out of the Republican Club?
Well, there they are with their white power signs.
There was an endless stream of them. There were like 50 of them coming out of the Republican Club.
They're going mainstream. This is who has taken over the Republican Party, folks. This is who you're aligning yourself with if you're voting for them. I mean,
I reported here a couple of weeks ago that groups like this were organizing to attack the Democratic Party, and were coming after us, and were going to violently arm themselves and attack.
Now, we should say that there was the club itself before the appearance was vandalized, although I think it was like the burning of the Reichstag, in other words, trying to pin it on Antifa.
The Antifa crowd can get a little aggressive.
Yes, they can.
And
we don't know what happened.
And I certainly got notices before this event saying the Proud Boys are coming to the Republican Club, come to a demonstration. I did not go to the demonstration. Now I'm glad I didn't go to the demonstration. But the night before, people had written a couple of, spray painted a couple of symbols on the doors, broke a window. That I don't quite understand that.
Screwed up the locks.
Oh, yeah, glued the locks. When I worked at CBS News and the union...
You're going to tell this on television?
Yes, the union was on strike.
Right, yes, they used to screw up the equipment.
They did, and they built a plywood wall all around the whole building, around the whole block, and the union guys went down the manholes outside the wall to get under and get into the building and cut cables. And they cut a cable on a Jets football game, and all hell broke loose.
That was my union at the time, David. I was at NBC.
Not a pretty picture.
All right, moving on.
Yeah.
Woes within the community. There was this big expose on Huffington Post, and if you are on our email list, I'll send you the link. But if you just Google Lambda Legal Crisis, you'll get the article. We've told you that there were trouble and that the executive director, Rachel Tiven, resigned. But it goes into great detail about how this group has had a hard transition from Kevin Cathcart, who was there for like 25 years, to Rachel. And problems are over diversity, problems over pay, problems over benefits, not funding certain transition-related care in their health plan, even though they're suing others for that. Although then they said that they would pay for it out of their own pockets. And
then strategic questions about what cases to pursue. Yes. What the strategy of the organization is to advance our rights. It's an interesting read with, of course, voices from all sides and conflicting stories. But
a long memo from Lambda at the end trying to respond to it. But, of course, we need Lambda.
Oh, my God,
It's been around since 1973.
We definitely need Lambda. They've done superb work over the years. And I say that even though they refused to defend me in the St. Patrick's Cathedral case. Not impact
when you were being
litigation.
Prosecuted by Dan Rather's son.
Yeah, well, Alan Dershowitz refused to defend us, too. That's all right. I defended myself. Convicted on 4 counts and proud of it. But there's another controversy in the community that is wider and is playing out now and will go wider.
And that you can be a part of.
Yes, exactly. And that is about the Pride parades. So Andy and I, as we have told you for months, are working with a group called Reclaim Pride NYC. We are fed up with the corporatization and privatization of the pride parades. And I have heard from someone in a position to know that there's a lot of internal upset with the privatization of the parade process and the lack of democracy and the lack of community. And in fact, what the parade has become here in New York, and I think in a lot of places around the country and around the world, is a showcase for supportive corporations who like to put big floats in parades and have employees or other people in their corporate T-shirts. And gradually, the community organizations and just plain people get squeezed out of this process, and in New York have been told last year and next year that a lot of them cannot march, cannot join the parade. It's too big, sorry, you can't join in. We have room for the corporations who are paying to achieve a prominent spot at the head of the parade, but you, sorry, no room for you.
It doesn't cost a lot of money to have a civil rights march and to have a human rights march. It's just like the women's marches. So what we're hoping people will do, and we're asking you to do, is to endorse this. But maybe you want to come to New York and be a part of the march that we're trying to organize here, that will be a civil rights march, or do it in your own hometown.
What we are doing is going back to the basic values of the Stonewall Rebellion. Having a massive people's march like the women's marches of the last couple of years, and they're having another one in January, by the way, and the original Stonewall marches, and just people in the streets, like the Vietnam War demonstrations I was part of many decades ago, all civil rights marches. You just want people in the streets.
Women's rights
expressing themselves, having their own voice, having a critical mass of people in the streets, not corporate floats.
And the reason is because, yes, it's 50 years since Stonewall, and we certainly have a lot. We've made a lot of progress, and we have a lot to celebrate, but we have a long way to go. We live in a country that doesn't even have a federal LGBT rights law, the Equality Act, and we live in a world. If this is world pride, we live in a world where, my God, we talk about it every week, the persecutions that people are undergoing. So it's got to be about what we're fighting for in the future.
Presumably, we want to keep fighting for our civil rights and our liberation in our individual cities and towns, in our states, in our country, and around the world. And that is what we think needs to be emphasized on the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion.
We really are asking you, and we put this in our emails, but we want you to go to the website, reclaimprideny.org, and endorse this. Have your organization endorse it as an individual. Please do that. Do it right now. Just go to the website. It's very easy to do. You go to the page where it says Get Involved, and then you say you're a group, you're an individual.
Sign up as a supporter. That's it.
And you sign up, and you're part of it. Whether you're going to do it with us in New York or you're going to do it in your hometown, and so start thinking about that, about organizing on the last Sunday of June, which is you all have pride marches other times of the year, but if everybody does it on that day, it's going to make an impact.
And that's the point, to make an impact with a values statement, not with a corporate float. A values statement which has been lost in the pride parades. We put out a press release this week to formally announce our intention to produce this event, and also noting that the Heritage of Pride here in New York has scheduled an opening ceremony at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, which is managed by an organization owned by Philip Anschutz, the notoriously homophobic billionaire who also owns Coachella and runs facilities around the country and a million other businesses. And he's a longtime supporter of the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Family Research Council, right-wing Republicans. He got called on this a couple of years ago, and he said, oh, no, I won't do that anymore. But he's still supporting all the right-wing Republicans.
Hasn't stopped. I mean, he gave some money to the Elton John Foundation. Big deal. If you're still doing the other stuff, you're killing us.
Exactly. So Sign up as a supporter at reclaimpridenyc.org. If you want to come to our meetings and get involved, please do in New York. We meet Wednesday nights now at 7 p.m. at the People's Forum. That's on, we'll have that note on our show note.
The People's Forum is at 320
West 37th Street.
Yes, and we are going to have a whole big town meeting to decide bigger issues around this on December, I believe it is the 5th. It's December the 5th. At 7 p.m.
at the People's Forum at 320 West 37th.
Getting it all down in my calendar.
Come on December 5th and get involved then. But really we encourage you, wherever you are hearing or seeing this, to get together with people in your local area and put together your own civil rights march on the last Sunday in June.
Which is June 30th.
We don't have to settle for, so many people I know say, I haven't been to the Pride Parade in years. I can't stand it. It's just not me anymore.
You're a former Grand Marshal.
I am a former.
You haven't gone for some years.
I rode a horse down Fifth Avenue as a Grand Marshal of the parade.
I'm a little more anal, and I've gone for the last 45 years in New York, but partly because we're covering it. And, You used to be able to just step into the parade and join it. Off the sidewalks, into the streets. That's how I got in the first place. I was a kid. I was nervous about coming to the city in 1974, and I was just standing on the sidelines. I'd never done anything that very public before. And and this is in my, my media market. But I jumped in and marched with a group that looked nice, and I had a fabulous time.
That was your mistake, joining a group that looked nice. But that is the magic of the old parade, that everybody would just come together. You'd see people you knew, you'd meet new people, but you were part of a crowd of people, of human beings.
And, frankly, I don't want elected officials leading the parade. They are not our leaders. I want everybody to have an equal place in the march.
Yes.
We want everybody to march. Politicians, we want groups to march, but everybody march. Bring a sign that says what you want to say on that day, the way we did in the Women's March.
Yes.
All right?
All right.
You think we've convinced them?
Well, I hope so, because they're going to hear about this for the next 9 months on this program, because we're not going away.
Right. All right. Let's talk about some other things that are going on. In Wisconsin. We do have things to march about. They denied health care to 2 trans women. There was a suit from the ACLU.
State employees.
Yes, and they have been awarded. One got $479,000 in damages, and the other $301,000. So there, Wisconsin.
Okay, well, some would say since they won, we don't need a march, but clearly we do, because they shouldn't be in that position to begin with.
Right.
In Minnesota, a straight couple who are filmmakers and avid Christians have filed a pre-enforcement challenge to a non-discrimination law. They've decided, at the behest of the Alliance Defending Freedom, to go to court and say, we are filmmakers and we want to make films about weddings and promoting marriage and, Christian straight marriage. But the law says that if we open a business doing that, we're going to have to film same-sex weddings. So we're going into court to argue against that. Now, we haven't opened our business. No one has asked us to do a same-sex wedding. But we have the Alliance Defending Freedom behind us, so that we're going to court to argue that.
I think Judge Kavanaugh might be sympathetic. We forgot to talk about him. I mean, the reason that we know he's to the right of Gorsuch, they were hearing this immigration case about detaining people who might have committed some infraction 50 years ago without a hearing, and the other justices are going, Are you serious? 50 years ago, we could still do it? And Gorsuch basically says during the hearing, that's what the law says, that's the way Congress wrote it, leave me alone, I'm running things here now. And
Gorsuch or Kavanaugh?
No, I'm sorry, Kavanaugh. Gorsuch was more sympathetic. Kavanaugh was just unbelievable. I mean, you'd think you'd have a little humility, you son of a gun.
Humility? Did you see him at the hearings?
I did.
And also,
but he said he was going to be fair.
And he's interrupting people on the court, too.
Yes.
He's being very rude to his fellow justices.
And I know some of you complain about...
They don't like that.
And I know some of you complain about me interrupting Ann or Ann interrupting me, but...
Never.
This is the way we do the show. All right. In Iowa, the government is refusing to grant a visa to a gay spouse who was a permanent resident since coming to the United States from Mexico in 2002. The United States Citizenship and Immigration Services sent a letter accusing them of a sham marriage.
There is no proof that you married for anything other than immigration rights.
So Nicholas Sellers says that Jose Hernandez, his spouse, is the other half of a heart. And you better stop this.
Yeah, that would be nice. In Washington, D.C., this on the 26th, that would be next week, they're going to inter Matthew Shepard's cremated remains at the National Cathedral.
Yes, and his personal effects are being donated to the Smithsonian.
And Bishop Gene Robinson is going to conduct the service for the interment. Here's what shocked me looking at this. It's 20 years since Matthew Shepard died. 20 years. He died 3 years before 9/11. That somehow that juxtaposition struck me that was before 9/11.
That was a long time ago when he was just a kid.
And we all got beat up by the cops here trying to march in his memory.
Here's a cautionary tale for you. In Shawnee, Kansas, teacher and city council member Justin Adrian was busted for having sex with a male student in a classroom during school hours. They met on Grindr and continued chatting on Snapchat. The student was 18 and of age, but Kansas has a law against teachers having sex with students. So he's up on one count of unlawful sexual relations and faces 2.5 years. Don't do it with students.
We told you about the young trans student in Virginia who had been not sheltered during a terrorism drill because she was not allowed to use either the boys' or girls' locker room. So she
kept in the hallway.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that they have been keeping her out of gendered spaces, boys' locker room, girls' locker room. They've been keeping her out of them for 4 years. The school board met about this after all the national publicity about this drill, and the superintendent expressed some sympathy to her, but they came up with no solution.
Well,
they have not decided to let her into the girls' locker room.
On the other hand, in Fairfax, Virginia, a 16-year-old boy was found to have sexually assaulted and harassed girls, and he was transferred to an alternative school. They investigated, but the boy and his father are suing for gender discrimination, saying this is worse than a criminal conviction on his record. And in the Bronx, New York, I've told you about the Abel Cedeno case, the kid in the Bronx a year ago who defended himself against an attack, ended up slashing 2 people, killing one of them. Well, the one who survived the slashing is suing him now for damages along with the school system. And
well, who else is he going to sue?
Well,
if he was an attacker, I get it.
He was attacking Abel, and Abel was defending himself.
Okay, I get it.
All right.
The New York Islanders hockey team got together with the LGBT Network, which is a group on Long Island here, to announce their support of an anti-bullying program. And they're going to hold a Pride Night January 13th at the Barclays Center, the Philip Anschutz managed arena.
For years, we've been telling you about the assault on a guy named Taj Patterson in Brooklyn in 2013, an African-American gay man. He was assaulted by a group of Hasidic men who were on a patrol in that neighborhood. 4 of them pled guilty or had their cases dismissed, but a guy named Meyer Herskowitz went to trial, was convicted, because his DNA was found on Patterson's sneaker, and he was sentenced to 4 years, but he's been out on bail, and now the Court of Appeals has said, we question the DNA evidence, no conviction.
Terrible. Let us honor a few heroes who died this week. Who have we got? First, Burl Boykin. Atlanta activist, 74 years old.
There he is.
He became an activist in 1963 when he was a student at Emory University.
He was a founder of the Georgia Gay Liberation Front in 69, right after Stonewall.
He was expelled from Emory in 63 for being gay.
Well, for hosting a man in his dorm room.
Well, I think that's the analysis.
That's all it takes.
Yeah, so 6 years later, in October 69, he formed the Georgia Gay Liberation Front right after the Stonewall Rebellion.
Yep.
In 71, he was the first Grand Marshal of the first Pride Parade in Atlanta.
They had 125 marchers in Atlanta, no permit. Couldn't get he couldn't get Jimmy Carter to do anything on gay rights when he was governor, but later when he
got him to support civil unions.
He worked as a journalist and a poet, 74 years old, a true pioneer.
A relentless activist all his life. Thank you, Burl, for all your work.
Tell us about Jenks Beers.
Jenks Beers was in L.A. She was 84 years old. There she is with her little doggie. She founded the Lesbian News in 1975, which was a still in operation. You can read the Lesbian News online. It was a very primary source for news of the lesbian community and still is, and she was a wonderful activist. She'd been in the Air Force. She quit the Air Force as a protest of what was going on in Vietnam. That was pretty ballsy.
And
you should
Northrop was
excuse
calling
the
on
expression.
soldiers to do that back then.
Oh, yeah, still am. She was out to her peers in the Air Force, but she was not out to her superiors, and she certainly was concerned that she would be thrown out. But she left because she was protesting. She was a member of the LGBTQ Journalists Hall of Fame because of her founding of Lesbian News.
And then there was Gene Ashworth, 80 years old, a pioneering speed skating champion, the first American to win a medal in it in 1960, which was the first year they let women compete in speed skating.
At the Olympics.
Her longtime partner was Christine Lefevre. She worked as a high school teacher in the Adirondacks in Wilmington, New York, and was also a town supervisor.
Pioneers, every one of them, and thank you for your wonderful hard work and outness.
Okay. International news?
Yes, please.
All right. In Austria,
yes,
we have the first same-sex couple getting married. They were one of the couples that was party to the suit in December. They're allowed to get married now. Everybody else, January 1st. And
the government announced that it is accepting the court ruling for same-sex marriage. Nice of them.
Which is why they were able to get married. So Happy New Year.
In Poland, a court says a lesbian couple can register as parents of their son.
And on the other hand, we told you that, there was a court ruling that said that they could have an equality parade in Lubin. The mayor said he's worried about violence, and believe me, they had to use tear gas to protect against the anti-gay protesters against this, but they did have their march there. The mayor said he does respect freedom of expression and freedom of gathering, unlike Donald Trump.
1,500 of us marched in the first Pride Parade in Lublin. 300 protesters showed up to attack with bottles, bricks, stones, and flares. The cops had to use tear gas, water cannons, and arrest people to stop the anti-LGBT.
Well, at least they protected them. In Australia, they have an evangelical prime minister now, Scott Morrison, but the government is urging a ban on private schools expelling students over sexuality. Labor wants to repeal exemptions that let religious schools discriminate entirely.
Because the government pushed this religious freedom rule.
One of the reasons there's a by-election on October 20th, which is why he may be softening up things.
And how do we feel about the Vatican being so nice to Cardinal Donald Wuerl, who resigned as Archbishop of Washington, Washington, D.C.
No discipline. You have to ask what they don't get it. Obviously, they did discipline 2 Chilean bishops who were retired. And they made Oscar Romero a saint, which was nice.
That was
but
nice.
then they made Pope Paul VI a saint. I was shocked. He was the first pope to publicly be accused of being gay. He actually responded to it personally, to the charge, which was
he like
a little weird in the
Lindsey
60s.
Graham walking through the airport, I am not gay?
This is a slander. I mean, who would address this in the past if But you notice they always skip over Pius XII, the Hitler Pope, when it comes to making anybody a saint.
In Brazil, we've been following the presidential campaign, and the first round winner, what's his name, Bolsonaro or something, who is very, very right wing, says if he had a gay son, he'd want him dead.
He'd beat it out of them.
Yeah. So he may very well win the presidency because
close.
he's very close to the evangelical Christian crowd that has become very prominent in Brazil. They have been growing exponentially. But in Brazil in particular, evangelical Christians have become tremendously powerful.
Catholics in decline.
Exactly. So now with his impending possible election, there have been homophobic assaults on people in Brazil. And there's some pictures of
scenes from all over Brazil.
There's a swastika carved into someone's back, injuries to people all over. Terrible violence breaking out, not unlike what's happening in this country around Trump's rhetoric.
Absolutely.
And in Iraq, a really heartbreaking story, a 14-year-old boy who was accused of being feminine was murdered by a homophobic mob on the street in Baghdad.
His name is Hamoudi al-Mutari, and it is just a heartbreaking story. He could be, there's a tape of this, which we're not showing you. He can be heard calling for his mother as he lay dying in the street. This is a 14-year-old, little kid, stabbed repeatedly. The killers joking as they tormented him. Wow.
Terrible. And on not quite as dire a note, in Bali, Indonesia, a beauty pageant was canceled. They had trained all the contestants on HIV education facts, and they were going to make this an event that really talked about HIV education. Well, right-wingers got hold of this information and started harassing the venue where they were going to hold the beauty pageant and got the venue to back out, and so the whole event was canceled.
Couple of marriage notes. In Thailand, they're set to approve same-sex unions. That's far short of equal rights. In Taiwan, the pro-equality same-sex marriage referendum has been cleared, and so you're going to have a civil union thing by the right wing, because they can't stop relationship recognition entirely based on the court decision on November 24th. And you're going to have the pro same-sex marriage thing on the ballot at the same time. What if both of them pass? In Honduras, opponents of same-sex marriage met with the High Court to express their displeasure with going ahead with same-sex marriage there based on the court decision. The
Inter-American Court of Human Rights is coming down hard on any country there that does not want to go along with their ruling for same-sex marriage.
In the Czech Republic, the European Committee of Social Rights says that the Czech policy of forced sterilization for those who want to change their gender violates their right to health.
You think?
Yeah. The BBC, okay. Follow up on that Chechnya situation where this guy Maxim Lupanov escaped, who was abducted for being gay back in 2017, testified. All of his complaints have not been investigated by the Russians. They're not doing anything. He finally fled Russia.
Don't go to Saudi Arabia.
Or Chechnya. The LGBT network, the Russian group, has evacuated 130 sexual minorities from Chechnya, and most of them have not just left Chechnya, they've left the whole country because it's part of Russia, legally.
Good for them for getting out.
Yes. Oh, well, it's just become impossible.
All right. AIDS news?
Well, Nice to see that Canada is the first major world economy to legalize marijuana. It's for recreational use, and it will make it easier to get pardons for those who have pot convictions. This is a big issue for people with AIDS who have had issues around being able to eat.
Definitely. I was in Baltimore for a day last week, appearing on a panel that was looking at the demonstration 30 years ago, seize control of the FDA.
We should pull out our old footage of that. Gay Cable Network was down there. My God, what a scene that was.
It was thousands of us from all over the country there to surround the FDA building and demand a change in their process for approving drugs. The idea was that they were very, very, very slow, and we didn't like their procedures for how they examined drugs either.
Peter Staley got up on a balcony overlooking the entrance, and
the canopy over the front entrance.
Right, and there was a lot of banging on the windows. And
well, cops pushed some of the ACT UP members through a window. That was very scary and dangerous. My favorite part of the demonstration was the media part, where a few of us were speakers to the national media. But meanwhile, because we were from all over the country, we had organized a long line of people from almost every state in the union lined up next to the main podium where we were speaking, and the whole national media was there. And everybody was holding a sign of where they were from. And when we finished doing the short remarks, we turned to the national media and we said, over there are people from every state you represent with your news organizations, and you can go talk to someone who is a hometown person for your newspaper. And there was this moment of drop-jawed silence from the media, like, what? And then they just whipped around and ran to the people on that line.
You've got to make their jobs easier.
Yes, you do. You have to give them what they need. And
when they cover your Pride March on June 30th, 2019 in your city.
So the Johns Hopkins School of Social Work, or Social Policy, whatever, convened a bunch of us who'd been at the demonstration and some others, a former FDA commissioner who turned out to be an idiot, Dr. David Kessler. He was not there at the time, but he said, this had no effect on me. You are an idiot. To do a couple of panels there. And so we relived some of this and talked about the issues at the time. And C-SPAN live streamed it, I think. And it was just very interesting to look at these issues and look at all of us 30 years later and consider it a very important moment. Well, 30 years. I also received this week this book put together by an ACT UP photographer, Bill Beitsura. It's called The AIDS Activist Project, and it's a collection of photographs of ACT UP members and other AIDS activists, with writings from many of them. And I have to say, I didn't expect a lot, and I sat down with this and I opened it up and I could not stop reading. I just read it cover to cover, every word, and it was fascinating and, of course, very moving to those.
Do you have a contribution?
I'm in there, but there are just an amazing number of people, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't, from all over the world. And if you want to know more about this, you can go to the AIDSactivistproject.org and see some of these pictures and read about it and find out about the book.
I would like to borrow it at some point.
You can borrow it right now.
Thank you, Ann.
Then I don't have to carry it home again.
Great, I'll carry it.
Put it in that sleeve.
I will, to protect it.
Okay.
Because it's a beautiful book.
All right. Well, the AIDS crisis is not over either, and that will be another thing that we will be talking about at the Stonewall 50 Human Rights and Social Justice March next June,
and it's going to
and in between.
And it's going to get worse when they start cutting Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security.
Yes, it is. All right. Well, from there on to entertainment news, of course. Well, I want to make sure everyone knows that New Fest starts next week here in New York, the LGBTQ Film Festival. has an incredible range of films, including Rafiki, the Kenyan film. I'm going to see that next week, and also something called Dyke's Camera Action, which is a documentary that should be swell. Boy Erased with Nicole Kidman.
I'll be seeing that tomorrow with Bill.
Good. You can tell us about it next week. They're running Milk, the Gus Van Sant movie, on its 10th anniversary. And Lisa Cholodenko's High Art, which was a wonderful lesbian movie. And she is appearing with Patricia Clarkson, who was in it, to talk about that. And there are a lot of international films. Newfest.org is where you can get the whole rundown. Newfest is
Jennifer Jason Leigh? Who was the woman?
No, it was Ali Sheedy.
Ali Sheedy was in it.
Yeah, that was hot.
Ali Sheedy, yeah.
High Art.
Well, I saw a play this week that I was very much looking forward to, Apologia, because it's by the out-gay playwright Alexei K. Campbell, the author of Pride. So it's a family scene in Britain. On the right there is Stockard Channing. She's about 75, I think. She's playing 60. She does terrific. And then I have to say, Hugh Dancy there, right next to her, plays her son. And then another son comes on the scene in another scene, and I didn't look in the program. It was also Hugh Dancy. The guy in the tweed jacket is the gay comic relief and the thing. But it's a clash of values play because Hugh Dancy brings home a woman who he's going to marry, and she's a Christian. Mm-hmm. And Stockard Channing plays an old leftist radical and who's an art historian. And so it's a clash of values. I thought some of it was a little too heavy-handed and like she was a little too nasty about some of her things. We like to be nice to people when we argue with them, believe it or not.
Okay.
But I think it's still a very stimulating evening of theater.
All right. We congratulate Chella Mann, 19 years old, trans man, hired by IMG, the big model agency. 19, trans man, Asian, Jewish, deaf, and showing off his mastectomy scars there in his topless photo.
He said 2 years ago, I wasn't even thinking about taking hormones or anything, and here I am. Look at me. Look at him.
Well, we are looking at you because you're a model.
Yes.
Well done.
And we told you that B.D. Wang married his long-term partner of 8 years, Mr. Schnorr, in Brooklyn. We have a shot of a happy couple. There they are. Congratulations to them.
And congratulations to Rufus Wainwright, his new opera Hadrian, well-reviewed.
This looks hot. I mean, Hadrian, of course, did have a male lover, and Antinous, who he grieved over mightily, and who almost became an alternate god to Jesus Christ at the time. I mean, that would have been nice if that had taken off. I don't know how much Rufus Wainwright gets into that, but they certainly get into the hot and heavy relationship. It's apparently one of the most homoerotic operas ever.
There have been some, but yeah, I take you at
There's
that.
lovemaking on stage.
Okay.
And congratulations to my friend Alan Cumming, my friend. I mean, we all love him. He was honored by the NYCLU. And he started off his speech by saying, what is this crap about the United States as the leader of the free world? We have to stop saying that.
Well, if we keep Trump in office, we will happily stop saying that because he's destroying our standing in the world.
No one can own your freedom.
All right, so if you want to be on our email list to get notices of the show each week and links to things we've talked about and a few extra links, write to...
write to gayusatv.org. Go there, gayusatv.org, and there is a place right there for you to sign up. You can also see the show there. You can get links to the podcast. You can listen to us. You can watch us online if you ever have any trouble accessing us on your television.
And start organizing your Human Rights March for the last Sunday in June to celebrate Stonewall 50.
And thank you for the birthday wishes from my secret admirer in Seattle.
Happy birthday. Goodbye. We'll
Bye.
see you next week.